My article, co-authored with LBJ PhD graduate Jae-hee Choi, entitled The Consequences of Economic Inequality for Presidential Elections in the United States, and published in the journal Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, applies the techniques that we developed at the University of Texas Inequality Project for the measurement of economic inequality to individual American states on an annual basis going back to 1969. And then asks if there is an association between the change of inequality as we measured it and the outcome in each state of presidential elections. And this is, of course, relevant because of the fact that the Electoral College awards electoral votes on a winner-take-all basis in almost all of the American states. So what we found is that, and it's quite, I think, initially perhaps counterintuitive to some people, is that states where inequality rose the most had a systematic pattern of drifting toward the Democrats, whereas the states where inequality rose the least remained or moved in the direction of the Republicans. The underlying political model, which is developed in the paper, argues that the Democratic Party's electoral base essentially draws on two opposite extremes of the income distribution: relatively wealthy urban professionals on the one hand, and relatively low income minority immigrant communities on the other. When these two together add up to a majority of the state, then you have a Democratic state. Whereas the Republican electoral base, which is small towns, suburbs, and rural areas, tends to fall in the middle of the national income distribution. And so there's an interesting, essentially political balance wheel effect. To the extent that Democratic policies reduce inequality, it supports the creation of Republican states. To the extent that Republican policies increase inequality, that supports the drift in the electorate toward the Democrats. One final observation is that we observe throughout particularly through the South in recent years, a steady move toward increasing within state inequality, which is associated with a drift of these in recent years, very Republican states toward the Democrats. Arizona, of course, has already tipped in that direction. Georgia tipped in the last election, and we see a definite movement in that direction, very noticeably in Texas.